But I imagine there's many locales you could find in America where the church has a significant presence. Most people are Christians. Most people in public office are Christians, and it's still vestiges of whatever's left of the Bible Belt that Russell Moore hasn't destroyed, or Gavin Ortland, or whoever was against that. So but they pick on Moscow because it's outward facing. It's letting everyone know this is what we're doing, and it's objectionable to them because it's competition.
Welcome to this Reformation and Revival video. Today, I have a special guest with me, a good friend of mine named Timon Cline, and we're going to analyze the recent Meet the Press interview. They came out here and visited Moscow, and then they did a piece on church and state. And as I watched it, Timon, I thought, I've got to have my friend Timon on. We've got to talk, because I was sitting there listening to the panel, and I said, Timon would have something to say about this. Timon is a prolific author. He writes all over the place. He is an attorney. He lives in Philadelphia. He has graduated Rutgers Law. He has graduated Westminster Theological Seminary, and we should have some fun today, considering what Meet the Press thinks about Moscow and, of course, Christianity and America. So here we go. Let's start with clip number one.
The Republican candidate for governor in Pennsylvania, the nation's fifth most populous state, said this to his supporters.
So much for this myth of separation of church and state.
That's right. And that's the same position that Michael Peroutka, the Republican nominee for Maryland Attorney General, it's a position he's taken since at least 2014, when he called the separation of church and state, quote, the great lie. And he added, there can be no separation of God from government because he, capital H there, created it. That would have been news to the founders, especially Thomas Jefferson, who was the first of the founders to use the phrase, the wall of separation metaphor, to describe the First Amendment's religious freedom protections. The Republicans, though, are openly embracing Christian nationalism.
There can be no separation of God and government. And Chuck says that would be news to the founders. Timon, is that how you understand things?
No, me and Chuck read different history books, obviously. So, yeah, there's so many issues when you get into debate over this point, because I think the terms become a little squishy and misused. So on the one hand, we're talking about church and state, two institutions. On the other hand, you might just say religion and politics, and those are different relations and different things at different degrees of abstraction. So, first of all, Chuck is even denying the more abstract point of just God and government, or just God and politics, and that this would be news to the founders that any religion has anything to do with the public sphere or with politics, however he would say it. That one, is probably the easiest to refute. The amount of reference to some form of name for God throughout so many of the founding documents. I mean, we'd spend the rest of the time trying to line them up. Almost every state constitution, if not every state constitution of the founding period, mentions God, whether in the preamble or their articles or declarations of rights, those sorts of things, and dedicate their governments, the state governments, to the Almighty, to God, to the Creator, so on and so forth. And then we can even move down the line to this question of establishment of church and state, what their relation is supposed to be. And, there's 13 colonies, obviously, at the beginning, some level of establishment in most of them, depending on their particular histories. So you would have somewhere like South Carolina that clearly establishes just a sort of generic or mere Protestantism at the beginning, and they put this in their first constitution, and reserve certain civil rights and certainly participation in government to Protestants, confessing Protestants. You have other states that are a little looser, like maybe a Delaware or a New Jersey, that simply recognize Christianity but still limit it to that, and even New Jersey limits it to Protestantism in some regards. Or maybe somewhere like Maryland, where you've got a Catholic aristocracy ruling over a population of predominantly Protestants, so it's just general Christianity. And then, of course, you have somewhere like Connecticut or Massachusetts that literally still have established churches at the time. And none of this was news to the founders. They weren't unaware of this when they're setting up the structure of the federal government. And what something like the Establishment Clause initially does is to preserve or protect from federal encroachment the state establishments. So this is literally the whole project. It's the whole structure at the beginning. And none of this would have been news to the founders, even if it is to Chuck Todd.
So 8 of 13 colonies, we're seeing some form of establishment. And so, yeah, as you mentioned, Chuck first says separation of God and government. And of course, you're going to say, well, if you're going to separate God from government, who is going to be in charge of government? And you're dealing with the only other option would be man, which is that very premise is just laced throughout the analysis of this panel on Meet the Press. One of the things I hope comes about as we view these clips is they're really thinking in a way that there is no God over the state whatsoever. There's no God in this particular sphere. But you end up with a vox populi, vox Dei kind of situation. The voice of the people become the voice of God, and you actually do end up with real tyranny. One of the things that Doug mentioned in passing didn't make it into the actual report from Meet the Press, but one of the things he was asked by his interviewer was, if this does become a Christian town, then what's it going to be like? And he said, well, it will be far more tolerant than the town is now.
That's right. That's right.
And that, you're like, what? I mean, people think this theocracy idea, like, oh, if it turns into a Christian town, if it turns into a Christian state, then it's going to be oppressive. Well, no, because there is actually a God of the system who is not man. And he's the one who's governing and regulating.
Yeah, you actually have a basis for law at all, right? To have some kind of transcendent referent undergirding your laws, and you have to do justice to the wherever power originates. You have to recognize it, and so whatever the basis of the power of your regime is, the regime, if it's coherent, should recognize it. And if we say it's from God, there's obviously recognition of God. If it's not from God and it's just the people, then it's going to be recognition of man. That undergirds your system, and as you've already said, that leads to many of the problems we have now. So at the founding period, the recognition of God is ubiquitous. There's no one at the time that would have disagreed with the statement that government is originating, at least in the deity, at least in some God. It's not in ourselves. Even if the people are the sort of the conduit through which power is disseminated, it's not the origination of it, nor is it the basis of law. So these are just, these were basic, unquestioned premises, a couple hundred years ago. And the other thing, we don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but the entire framing of Chuck Todd's new series, The Rise of Theocracy, I guess, is such a typical move from the left when they encounter Christians that are politically active or politically interested in utilizing their theology in that way. Just having a Christian state is not a theocracy. A theocracy requires that you have a clergy class that is ruling over the government, right? So the church would literally have to be synonymous with the government and rule it, and you'd have to have a pope or something as your president. This would be a theocracy. No one is advocating for that I know of. No one. So, and no one in the founding era did either. This would be a confusion of the two powers. So the calling it a theocracy, it's a scare tactic, but it's not descriptive at all. So they're already dishonest in their approach to the entire game.
Provide just a little bit more about that distinction between a theocracy and having a clergy actually operate as a ruling class over the state versus just this church establishment that you referred to earlier.
Yeah, so in a church establishment where you have to keep it clean, the most basic way, you'd have one church or denomination that is recognized by the government as the official religion of the state. Doesn't mean you don't have tolerance as well, but you have this official recognition. So there's state support for this particular church, right? Whether through taxes or what have you. And also the church provides, assistance to the magistrate in the sense they provide moral teaching and these things that can then undergird law. But this is not to usurp the role of the civil power or the magistrate, who has as our confessions recognize, a religious duty to his people and to protect the church and the true religion and the gospel. But at the same time, he doesn't promulgate doctrine. He doesn't usurp the role of the church in their legislative competency. So you can have an establishment without either of the two powers being confused, and also without the magistrate becoming head of the church or the church becoming head of the civil government. So the confusion comes in with something like theocracy, where you have one of the powers exceeding their legislative competency and doing things that they're not supposed to do. But of course, theocracy sounds scary, and this is usually how people refer to Puritan New England as being a theocracy. But Puritan New England had laws saying clergy could never hold office simultaneously with an office in the church. So it's a law against theocracy. It's impossible to do. So it's just not legit. We've never had theocracy in this country, and nor is anyone, to my knowledge, that's in the kind of groups they're attacking advocating for such.
So even to comprehend the distinction, people need to be reminded maybe of something like Kuyper's three spheres: church, state, and family. And in the church, I'm a pastor in the church, and what you're saying is theocracy would require that I operate as an official in the state, and no one's advocating for that. There would still be, if you were elected, which I think would be a wonderful thing, as I mentioned. I think you'd be elected Lord Protector of the United States. You would have state duties. I would have church duties, and no one wants to muddy those waters. So.
Yeah, it's a division of labor, I think, would be, the way the magisterial reformers would kind of think of it. And you need to be focused on those duties. So you can't do both at the same. You could be a pastor that then becomes a magistrate, and you no longer perform your pastoral duties or something like that. But you can't do both at the same time would be the principle. And I think that's more or less the gist. But of course, if you already have the premise that never shall the twain meet, religion and government or whatever, then any kind of interaction starts to look a lot like theocracy to them.
And it looks like theocracy to Meet the Press, given what's going on out here in Moscow. We see this in clip 2. Let's look at this one.
Decision overturning Roe versus Wade has religious overtones. It has been cheered on by conservatives on religious grounds. And in fact, it's actually led some liberals to look to the religious freedom restoration laws, many of them vigorously opposed over the last decade, to use these laws as an attempt to challenge these statewide abortion bans that are being passed around this country. So, as a country, we are entering unknown territory. What is next? Where is this movement heading? My colleague, NBC News correspondent Ann Thompson, traveled to Moscow, Idaho. It's a blue enclave, small blue enclave, in an otherwise ruby-red state that has been grappling for years with questions about the role religion should play in the public square and everyday life.
In northern Idaho's dunes of grains and grass, a battle without bullets over the direction of a town.
I believe that what's happening in Moscow is a microcosm of what's happening all across the country that started here maybe 10 or 15 years earlier than what's happening across the country.
And that is?
Well, just the radical division. I don't think our nation has been this divided since 1859. It's divided and it's inflamed. And that whole process, I think, began to be visible here a decade or a decade and a half before it became radically visible in the nation as a whole.
So there's a couple things in that clip. There's first Chuck opening by saying that abortion has been addressed on religious grounds. And as you just established, well, of course it has been, and it ought to be. And that's not a theocracy. That's the simple point that this is an inescapable concept. You're going to have religion informing the ethics of your particular society. And the fact that it's doing so is not something to be lamented. And to pretend that you're going to have some kind of genuine secularism that's going to be able to inform your culture, your civil life, your ethics, that's simply a lie. Underneath that secularism, you're going to find various idols, and then Pastor Doug here sets up this division that exists in Moscow and says this is a microcosm of what's going on in the broader nation. We see that now. I think there's Christians far and wide all across America. That's why you're having this Christian nationalism push. Christians far and wide that can see the ethical division. We had Black Lives Matter riots, we had the COVID tyranny and lockdowns, and they see that, but they might not see the religious impulse that's informing this particular division. You've written a lot about this. Against Public Atheism is one of your recent articles. Just address that topic. Yes, there is the divide. Yes, people are seeing it, but what role does religion have to play in all of this?
Yeah, so I think, that this, as I said in that article that you referenced, it's a typical sort of liberal posture. And this would include Christians who are genuine Christians and, believe the Bible and all that. But it's a public posture towards religion in the public square that I call public atheism, which is just the idea that you live as if there's no God in your socio-religious or socio-political context, right? So at home, you do believe there's one and you worship him, but when you step out the door, now you have to live as if he's not there. This is Romans 1 behavior at root. So you're suppressing the knowledge and not allowing it to be actionable in the rest of your life. And I think this is, at least in greater evangelicalism, it's probably the predominant mood, or has been, for so many people. And this is why politics, their political theory out of someone like David French or sort of the third wayist, Keller and these guys, it becomes, as my friend James Wood has pointed out, very evangelistic. That's all they kind of have. And so they're inherently afraid of power, or think all power is bad, and will point out the dangers of power being misused, even though that's inherent in the definition. It's like people, pointing out that guns can kill people. And it's like, well, yeah, but obviously that's it. But it's the question is who's wielding it. It's the same thing with political power, but they have this sort of defensive crouch, or maybe timid crouch about the use of political power, and there should be this very neutral public square where we're all playing by the same rules, or whatever they want to say. And this is supposed to solve, this dream they have, this nightmare they have about what medieval Europe was like. In fact, they don't ever read anything about medieval Europe, but they've got this Enlightenment myth about the Dark Ages. And the worst thing that could ever happen is for religion to start mattering to people again in public, because that leads to violence, because everything's so peaceful right now. So we certainly wouldn't want to do that. But liberalism and secularism promise peace, because religion is fanaticism, and it really shouldn't matter except in your prayer closet. But what we find out, as you've already alluded to, is something will fill that void. There's going to be, to maintain the pejorative, there's going to be fanaticism, things that are animating people beyond the bare kind of bones of political policy, of like the tax code or something like that. The reason people come out to vote, the reason people show up to riot, are always inherently moral reasons, because these are actually the things that matter the most to moral beings. And we care about what the central civic cult is going to be in our societies, that we rally around together, because we need to be able to understand each other and be dedicated to the same final ends. Otherwise, there's complete chaos. So it's something worth fighting over. And even liberals recognize this. They just do it through their substitutes. And so I think that's, it's a total, but as you said, what you have to do as a liberal, as a secularist, is pretend that you're not doing that. And so we have all these great phrases that you can, this great lexicon that maintains to the bitter end that no, we don't do that. We're above that. We've transcended the transcendent, and we no longer need to have that in the public square. So we are neutral, and democracy is about sharing, or whatever they say later that we'll get to. And that's all just not true on the ground, as for the examples you've already mentioned demonstrate that. And the fact that they are so actually exercised by a competitor religion in Moscow or wherever. There's plenty of places, I'm sure, that are like Moscow that just don't have quite it's not as coherent or sort of, it's not being orchestrated in the same way, and you don't have the same personalities leading it. But I imagine there's many locales you could find in America where the church has a significant presence. Most people are Christians. Most people in public office are Christians, and it's still vestiges of whatever's left of the Bible Belt that Russell Moore hasn't destroyed, or Gavin Ortland, or whoever was against that. So but they pick on Moscow because it's it's outward facing. It's letting everyone know this is what we're doing, and it's objectionable to them because it's competition.
Yeah, I'll give you a brief word on Moscow, and then I want to consider this next clip that you mentioned where one of the panelists speak of this Christian nationalism that they're addressing as a power trip, and democracy, of course, is all about sharing. So there's a lot to explore there. But since you mentioned the Moscow thing, and they come out here and they see what's going on. Growing up in the Southeast, I grew up in a Christian area, and went to Southern Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. So you have this Bible Belt that's still there, but it's eroding, right? It's being conquered daily, and people are starting to feel that. Out here in the Northwest, you don't have that history. You don't have that Bible Belt kind of thing. So if you hold to the same convictions, like we believe the Bible, well, that pops out here in the Northwest, and it pops when you live in a very small town that has a major university in it, and you're 10 minutes away from another town that has a major D1 university in it. That's the dynamics that are going on out here. There's certainly a robust Christianity. There's all of Christ for all of life going on, and when that meets the Northwest in a college town, you have the kind of things that are coming up. But I enjoyed watching one of the tweets from Meet the Press that said, Pastor Doug in this church believes that wives should submit to their husbands, and they believe that homosexual practice is a choice that's a sinful one. And like every retweet was like, "Oh, you found Christians being Christians."
Right.
People have held
strange.
Yeah, they've held this for 2,000 years. So it's beautiful to see God's actually creating that line so Christians far and wide across the nation can look and go, oh my goodness, I see what's happening here. I'm going to be sent off to the gulag too. This isn't really some kind of quirky thing that's happening out in the Northwest with a particular community. These are brothers and sisters in Christ that believe the same truths, same Bible, same salvation, same Christ that I do. So let's consider this next clip where one of the panelists talk about this power issue that's going on with this Christian community or this Christian nationalism, contrasted with democracy and how generous it is to all people.
Christian nationalism, and Anthea brought this up earlier, is about power. And when we think of that in terms of a democracy and a functioning democracy, it's about sharing power and playing by the same rules. And so with Christian nationalism, we find over and over that if it comes down to democracy or power, they're going to choose power every time. And so this idea of a country for the people, by the people, it's really a country for a particular people, by a particular people. And so for those in the GOP, trying to figure out, are we really about democracy where we're going to play by the same rules or not? And that's the big question, I think, at stake.
Okay, there's a lot to sort out in that time, and you really need to untangle that knot. You have democracy on this side, and you have Christian nationalism that's all about power on this side. You also have democracy that's playing by the same rules, and then you have Christian nationalism, which obviously is not playing by the same rules. Can you make some sense of what we just heard?
Yeah, so I mean, you could take it from the top with the kind of predictable objection that he says presumes we live in a democracy, and I would say says who? Because one of their objections, if I say that America was founded, or at the founding it was a Christian nation, they're going to say, well, where's that in the Constitution? Right, and where's God in the Constitution? I would say, right, okay, where's democracy in the Constitution? It's not there. So what do you have to do? You have to look at the structure of at the time. You have to look at what's undergirding everything, and there you don't find democracy, but you do find Christianity. So these are some other historical problems for them. We would say that at the founding it's a mixed regime. There's totally a democratic element, but there's also an aristocratic and indeed an executive or even monarchical one. And we've seen even the monarchical one be stronger than others at various points, whether, most recently FDR would be kind of your last. But moving on, so this idea, democracy is again one of those words that you use as a liberal to push to actually get your own power. Democracy, citing democracy in this way is about asserting power and about maintaining the regime rhetoric. But even if we take Andrew here on his own terms, the idea that democracy is by definition antithetical to power. These are the two choices set up. This is the binary. It's power or democracy, and democracy is about sharing power, I suppose, and power is just power. I mean, these are not, this is apples and oranges, but power is just power, I guess, for Andrew. This is strange because democracy is a form of government which presumes the operation of power and is a particular way of organizing power, but it's not antithetical to power. And I would also say democracy is not about sharing, because actually in democracy you set up quite a bit of competition. Elections are about gaining power. And then when you gain power, you do the things you want to do that your constituency put you in power for. And that's the whole ballgame. I mean, this is what Joe Biden is doing now. Every president comes in, they throw out all the executive orders of the last president, and they, for a while, the first couple of years may have control of Congress, or a year up to the midterms, and they try to get as much done as they can because they have power. So it's just a way of, democracy is just a means through which power is allocated, but it's not antithetical to power. So setting up this way is very disingenuous. It makes no sense to me. It's a sort of nonsensical line he has. But of course, he's insinuating that, people who are not for democracy, because you can always set this up, ask people, do we live in a democracy? And they might have some of the questions I just had. But should we? And the appropriate answer for a liberal is always say, yes, democracy, good. Democracy is why we in fact, we exercise imperialism for the sake of democracy. We go take over countries for democracy, to force it upon them, even though they didn't choose it. So democracy is very demanding that way. Everyone needs to have it, but also all about sharing and being nice. And so, everyone thinks we should live in democracy because it's the right answer, because it's good, just like neutrality, good, just like liberalism, good. So all these things. So you have to kind of say this in response to the theocrats, right? Because they're bad, and so they just want power. They're ruthless. They, I suppose, it means we're disingenuous, and we don't care about other people or their well-being. Is the whole setup. So you just can't fall into this, this sort of game that's being played. You can't play by the rules and the terms they try to force us into.
Yeah, the whole setup here, we've already established that God is separated from government. That was what Chuck pointed out in the very beginning. We can't have that kind of thing. So you have this government operating apart from God, apart from his authority, apart from his revelation. And then you bring in the idea of democracy over against Christian nationalism, which is actually going to look to the Christian God. So democracy is something that exists all by the people. It's a government by the people, for the people. And it doesn't look to the heavens for any kind of information about how we are to order ourselves and conduct ourselves in civil society. That's what's being presented here. The problem is, okay, well, where do your ideas come from? Like, you're still going to have a power structure. You're still going to have a God of that system. You're just saying we don't want it to be the God of the Bible. And as you pointed out earlier, this is all over. I mean, God is engraved on our buildings. God's name is written on our money. Everywhere you look, we are one nation under God. He's all throughout our songs. You talk about what's rising, a rising theocracy. What's rising is this wild secularism that is trying to actually cut the tie from the heavens when it comes to how we're going to order our society, how we're going to live as a nation. Yeah,
there's two things, in a clip. It's not just Andrew Whitehead. He's very representative. That's why he's on the panel. He's being a good representative of the what's acceptable. If you look at the scope of history, everything that they're advocating here is really, really new. So up until yesterday, I mean, democracy was the dumbest idea in the world. No one liked it, and it thought it would end, in pure chaos. Munster with the Anabaptists is a really good example of like pure democracy and sort of a communist democracy, weird stuff, and it erupts in pure terror. And so this idea of like an actual democracy where you basically crowdsource policy or whatever is really, really dumb. Every statesman used to think so. The founders thought so. The only references to democracy in something like the Federalist Paper are in the negative. I mean, you can't just have this democracy. So they've forgotten the entire structure of our government is not just that. You have a democratic element, but it's not a pure democracy, because that would be bad. The other thing he mentions, though, along with this, by the people, for the people thing, where you just apparently men are never ruled; they just kind of voice their opinions, and their opinions are actualized by their lackeys that they've elected, which is, you could call that an exercise of certain kind of power. But the when he says that's not what power does, the theocrats don't want by the people, for the people. They want a particular people, or by a particular people, for a particular people. Well, all you've just described is nationhood. I mean, that's not a really interesting point to make. Of course, it's not just everyone, because the rest of us aren't global citizens. We think of ourselves as being in a actual place, knowing actual people. And so this idea that it's scandalous that a government or that a political system would serve a particular definable, group of people, that's very strange. I mean, this is not good political thought. It's like saying, I mean, the church analogy is easy. A pastor has to know who his flock is so he knows who to serve. And if a government doesn't know who its people are, it will not know how to serve them well. And query whether we, see this in the American regime itself. It seems that we are increasingly good at serving people who are not citizens, whether that's in Eastern Europe or the Middle East, and really, really bad at serving, people who are actually citizens, whether that's, people hooked on fentanyl or whatever. So, the logic here, the liberal logic that Andrew Whitehead is very expertly parroting, and showing his, regime bona fides, he belongs, he's saying the right stuff. It's actually very, it's a troubling thing. It's new, it's innovative, even though they're pretending theocracy is on the rise. This is the innovation. It's actually theirs that is new, their approach to human life and to government and politics. And the proof is in the pudding. It's not going well. So no wonder people are looking for other answers to the sort of soulless secular existence they've imposed on us.
Yeah, the line about government, for a particular people and not for all people, your position is excluding certain people. It seems to run right along the lines of this you can't legislate morality idea. It's like, well, no, that's what law does. Like, all law legislates morality, and all law, all standards, all government is going to say certain things are out of bounds. These things are out of bounds. So that was asked again and that's actually in the piece that Meet the Press did. Doug's interviewer asked, what about homosexuality? And he said, do you mean marriage? And she said, yes. And he says, well, no, there wouldn't be marriage. There wouldn't be homosexual marriage in a Christian town. So this is the way, and she said, even though it's the law of the land, they made a very good point about, well, as Roe was. So these things, obviously Roe going down, as Chuck mentioned at the very beginning, absolutely has to do with religion, has to do with God who exists, who says that we ought not to murder. And the same principles would be applied to marriage. But posing it as, well, democracy is just kind of for all people and there's nothing exclusionary about it. Well, no, this is just what government is, what law is. It's going to regulate the community. It's going to regulate the ethics of that particular community.
Yeah, the pedagogical effect, not just in the Calvinist sense, but that law as a teacher, is a very classical idea and something we used to understand. Actually, something the liberals do understand, even if they don't say so. I mean, this is really the effect of something like Obergefell. I mean, there was not a lot of implementation that was necessary after Obergefell to make this kind of actionable or to have it policeable. What it does is just teach people what's appropriate, what's legal and good, and people kind of fall in line. I mean, laws against theft of property, we do have to enforce them, but think about how often we don't have to enforce them. What it does, and what we hope it does, is tell people that this is wrong because it's codified in law. If it's codified in law, I know it's wrong, and I don't want to do that. I don't want to be a lawbreaker. And it's not good for us. And the law is very effective this way. I mean, this is something the Marxists actually knew very well, and were correct about. And so, the status quo, the legal status quo, as Doug was pointing out, is not as set in stone as everyone pretends it is. But we also have to recognize that the laws, even bad ones that we want to overturn, they are still teaching us all the time. And you see this in something like religious liberty jurisprudence, where most Baptists today operate basically with a theory of religious liberty that's Supreme Court dicta. And they've just kind of baptized it and keep chanting it all the time. And that's sufficient for them. But it has a moral force because it's been codified in law. And so these things, even when you don't have to enforce them or police them, they're extremely powerful. You can see it in that woman's question. Her rebuttal to Doug Wilson when she asked about gay marriage is simply, well, it's the law, though. How could you possibly say that? So you see the power and effect of these things, and that's why Christians have to be more interested in that aspect of law and politics. Of the sort of soft power it provides is just as important as the hard coercive power it does.
The positioning of this panel seemed to come back again and again to the idea of, well, all people, and there's a legal component, an exclusionary component to this Christian nationalism position, and then there's not to our position. Democracy is for all people, and that even came out in the Christianity that was addressed. So one of the panelists actually commented on the way Jesus conducted his very own ministry and was trying to set that at odds with this Christian nationalism that is now on the rise. Let's consider this clip.
By the way, going back to Christianity, and Ann, maybe you could shed some light on this, but Christianity, I mean, Jesus Christ invited people to follow. It was never an imposition, right? Because
let's put it like that. He did not twist their arm. You could come or not. You want to follow this guy, you don't. Yeah. That's all it is.
Anthony,
so they really like that. Like, all the panelists really light up when this lady says, "This is what Christianity is about. You can, you can follow. You want to follow this guy or not? That's all that it is. As if there is not every knee shall bow, every tongue shall confess that Jesus is Lord." What is this signaling about the kind of the worldview that's undergirding the way they're thinking about the political realities they're discussing?
I mean, a couple of things I'd love to ask the woman who said that. I forget her name. I would bet money she doesn't believe in the resurrection, because if you believe in the resurrection, that doesn't work anymore, because Christ is victorious and he's of course returning again, and his kingdom is already inaugurated, and he's building places in heaven for us, and he's going, and every knee will bow. So I bet she doesn't believe in the resurrection. I bet it's the moral Jesus that's the meek and the mild only. And of course, we would say yes, he does invite people to follow him. And the reason that's being cited is this sleight of hand, this unspoken. They're not showing the math, but what they're doing is saying theocracy, Christian state, whatever they want to call it, where Christ is recognized by the powers, by civil powers, and Christian teaching from Scripture is integrated into law where appropriate, so on and so forth. What that is really coerced faith, right? As if this is what a Christian nation would do. So we're going to frog march people into church and put gun to people's heads and make them, say Christ is Lord, and then actually somehow believe it. And we, of course, in any good Christian Orthodox teaching, no one believes that. We know genuine faith cannot be coerced, and we're not interested in doing so. We are interested in the political world, in social order terms. We're interested in outward behavior that is moral and peaceable. And even then, of course, someone like Thomas Aquinas recognizes you cannot police every single sin out of existence. That's just impossible to do. We accept that. We're realist about it. So the sleight of hand there is to say, real Christians wouldn't want to coerce people into faith. And what they're saying is that's what we're wanting to do. But it's, of course, not what we're wanting to do. No one is saying that either, just like no one is saying that clergy should rule the state. So these are subtle things that they do that's very disingenuous and unfair. They're not actually debating us. They're not actually taking it seriously. You notice throughout the entire special, this entire episode, Moscow, Doug Wilson, is simultaneously scary, it's terrifying, but also irrelevant and has no power, and this is never going to happen, and it's a joke. So they oscillate in this schizophrenic way between this is hilarious and a joke, it's also terrifying. And they just go back and forth, and it's like you have to pick one. It has to be one or the other. Things that are a joke to me are not usually scary because they can't hurt me. And so, you have these kinds of quips like this of like, it's it's so hilarious that they want to coerce people into faith, and this is a big joke. They're all laughing about it, but then why are you doing the special? So they know something is there, but they've got to caricature it, they've got to make fun of it, and they've got to misrepresent it. And so that that kind of thing is interesting. It's also revealing for the general pathology that's undergirding all of their rhetoric here and approach to the topic.
Yeah, your analysis of the state into this is really good. No one's trying to, from the state vantage point, coerce faith in order to be a citizen or whatever. That's not what's going on. The pastor in me, from the church side of things, listens to that lady and says, this is a gift from God that Meet the Press did this. And my hope is that people would see the distinction in worldview between that panel and what's going on here in Moscow. One of the things that makes people nervous is that the Moscow community is living an ordered life. There's a well-ordered life that's forming. There's a well-ordered community that's forming, and it's based off of the Word of God. It's actually based off of the God who is, the Creator who is. And they feel that form. They feel that structure coming down, and they're much like the kings in Psalm 2, right? These heathen kings who say, let us burst his bonds apart, cast away his cords from us. They don't like the form that's coming. They take a shot at patriarchy. Again, wives submit to your husbands just in the Bible. But it's the order that is beginning to make them uncomfortable. And the Christianity that was, the false Christianity that was just pronounced by this lady is, well, Jesus, you can come to Jesus if you want to, and if not, no big deal. Well, is that really the Christian faith? If you don't call Jesus Lord and trust him, what will happen to you? Well, you, of course, will be condemned by God. You will still be in your sin. And Christians love you and don't want that for you. We want you to be saved. That's why we're doing this whole thing. We want the good news of Christ to be made known. We want people to repent of their sin and call upon the name of the Lord. So to present Christ as if he's a take it or leave it, and hey, it worked for me, maybe it'll work for you, but if it doesn't, if this isn't your particular taste, don't worry about it. That's really the ideology that's undergirding the particular democracy that they're talking about, the secular democracy, where all people are included, regardless, again, which is a lie on its face. That's not how actually they're living, but that's what they're promoting. And the Christianity that they're promoting, or at least this one woman was promoting, is the same kind of thing. Well, it's a take it or leave it kind of, you'll be okay, whether you bow to the Lord of Lords or not. And so you can start to see the faith here that's undergirding their particular vision of how society ought to be ordered. And that's an enlightening thing for all Christians to see. Okay, I'm starting to see there's a connection between one's religion, one's worldview, and what kind of civil government they're going to establish.
Yeah, I mean, they certainly treat Jesus like he's just one option on the buffet. And if it gives you sort of personal fulfillment and the ability to make meaning in your life, or whatever you want to say, then go for it. But certainly don't impose, that on the rest of us, because the buffet is here. We have lots of choices, and it's this sort of voluntarism that obviously goes hand in hand with their heavily purely democratic leanings. That is, this is endemic in evangelicalism as well. So many people grow up in non-denominational or very loose denominations, I guess I would say, with no real confessional tradition, no catechesis. They grow up outside of a tradition, basically. They grow up in mere Christendom, if that. And this is something that if you read the historian Robert Handy talks about, when establishments in America, finally kind of dissipate, you move into the post-Great Awakenings, you move into this purely voluntarist sort of ethos in Christianity. And so the battle becomes sort of over jockeying just for culture, because that's the only mechanism of control anymore. You no longer have any particular church to look to. You have all these options too, all these denominations, all these societies, set up for like every kind of possible reason, for every cause. And it just becomes completely chaotic, but it's this voluntarist spirit that then runs through all of it. And it's just choice after choice after choice for your own fulfillment. And that's still with us now. And that's a result of destroying any kind of institutional, central loci that can provide moral teaching and also discipleship, for those that are true believers and everything. So this is somewhat predictable and somewhat very American. It's just extremely low church, no pressure. Seeker. You could even call that seeker sensitive or something like that. I mean, these are things that we as Christians are guilty of perpetuating. Is my point. Of we've kind of joined in doing it this way and have run church this way as well. And somewhere like Moscow, where you have a particular church and people being formed by that in those particular communities, and it's not pure choice all the time. That's threatening to the choice, because the only value is the choice and the consent. All legitimacy in a democracy like they want is through the options and then the consent, and that's the voice of the people. Yeah.
It is quite threatening to them, and you can kind of sense the underlying fear, concern about what's going on. And we have a last clip here. It's interesting that they project that fear onto this particular community out here in Moscow, and they project that fear onto the whole Christian nationalism altogether considered throughout the nation. So let's consider this last clip.
Almost at the exact same time, those that are religious are almost becoming more fundamentalist.
Right. But
almost out of fear of this growing secularization.
And that's what I think it gets to, is that there is a great deal of fear. And if you look at the issues that they grab onto, the issue of abortion, the issue of same-sex marriage, opposing same-sex marriage, the issue of gender identity, all of those are driven by fear. Mm-hmm. And I asked Pastor Wilson that. I said, America is becoming less Christian. Fewer Americans want to be part of organized religion. And he just sees that as a further challenge. He believes he can change minds.
So what she says here is, well, it's contradictory on its face, because in the first place, there's fear going on. And then she refers to Pastor Wilson, who everyone who knows Pastor Wilson knows that there's no fear going on there. And in the clips, you can tell there's no fear. There's some Chestertonian cheerfulness going on in the ministry that's going on out here. But she says, hey, Christianity's not looking good in the States. And the response is, well, that's great. That's not causing us to run in a corner. That's actually saying, like, well, we believe that there is a God who actually transforms people, who actually causes dry bones to live. So, and this is, as this piece will be very public, you will find a strand of Christianity that does have that fear. People that aren't trusting God, they are trusting man. They want good neighbors. They don't understand what's going on. This is why one of the things is really needed is a sense that, no, God is in heaven and he does all that he pleases, and he has a particular plan for this world. He actually brings that plan to pass. He sent his son, Jesus Christ, who's the second Adam, who's constituted a new humanity. There's people that are forgiven of sins, that God's word will triumph, and the knowledge of the Lord will cover the earth as the waters cover the sea. That whole vision causes Christians to be quite cheerful, quite confident in the Lord, and actually not the ones who are fearful, and who actually, when you look at the whole clip from NBC here, you can see where the fear is, but it doesn't seem to be on the side of the Christians.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I mean, we're not the ones. Did Canon Press do a special on the rise of Chuck Todd or anything like that to freak out about? I mean, so obviously this is the fear. They're projecting there, as they often do. Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing I would say, at least for myself, this is how I view it. I mean, these things, when we talk about our social order and how this should be organized, what should be the central moral vision in informing our activity together, our life together. This is a matter of duty. I don't think I'm going to usher in the eschaton by any particular, nor is that my job to do this, because this is in God's providence. That'll occur when he's ready for it. But in the meantime, I do have duties on earth, and those are duties to family. Those are duties to your church. Those are duties to your nation. And you would be derelict in that duty if you just let it, turn into a dumpster fire, when you have the ability to maybe reform it, or to live, to walk humbly, live justly. I mean, these are very basic Christian principles. I don't know why it shocks them. And it's weird that it shocked them that there's a bunch of Christians in Moscow, and I think Wilson puts this way, they're trying to evangelize people. I don't know why that was shocking. This is what they're doing there. They are trying to turn people into Christians, which I thought is what Christians do. And having an interest in your community, they certainly do this. They think if something is harmful, usually to other people, they're advocating their abortion, gender, whatever else. These are things they're saying are being taken away from other people, and they're really potentially by all of us, and they're really concerned about maintaining them. So they're acting on behalf of others because they're seeking their good in their own twisted way. They're seeking the good of those people, which is basically an unalloyed choice on all fronts. And we're doing the same thing. We're saying, no, those things are actually not good for people. And so we're going to actually seek the good of our community in the way that we understand it, which we have to know is true. This is just what you do in politics. I'm again not really sure why it's so controversial, other than that it's seen as a threat and competition to their own power. And they also find this extremely foreign because they've fully imbibed a secular worldview, or whatever you want to call it. And this is also a threat to that, right, as well.
Yeah, the lines are clearly drawn, and it was great to see NBC through this Meet the Press special actually give voice to Christians who are living like Christians in the world and are seeking the manifestation of that Christianity in their town. It's a glorious thing out here in Moscow, and I think it's something that many Christians far and wide across America really are wanting to see happen in their own towns where they live. That divide politically is clearly seen with the Christian nationalism that's going on versus secular vision and the form of democracy that flows from that particular secular vision. So you can see the Lordship of Christ manifesting itself here in this conversation. And it's a beneficial thing to take a look at this particular panel as they try to understand Christianity. Surely we're trying to preach Christ because he is the light, he's the truth, he's the one that's going to actually open up eyes so they can see what we're talking about. So, Timon, thanks for joining me. You've written prolifically on all of this, so I'd point people to American Reformer. Is that the primary place where they can go right now to gather some of your writing?
That's right. I think the public atheism one was at American Conservative, again, another American. But the rest of most of what you're referring to is at American Reformer. So that's the best place. I've been writing a lot for them.
Very good. Well, thanks again for joining me today.
All right. Thanks, Dan.